Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and Giallo enthusiasts. It's Tanner Leeser, your host for The King in Giallo. This is episode 8 of the Forgotten Giallo film series, 1968, Part 2, and I've got 2 Gialli I'd like to highlight. As always, thanks in no small part to Troy Howarth's book on Giallo cinema, So Deadly, So Perverse, 50 Years of Italian Giallo Films, Volume 1, 1963 to 1973. Like this video and subscribe to The King in Giallo, and do ring that notification bell so those lords of the algorithm may bestow their blessing upon me, and you continue to be presented with weekly Giallo content. This all helps me build my brand here as I fight to get to 1,000 subscribers and get one step closer to monetization here on YouTube. On to the video. The first of 2 Gialli for this video is A Hyena in the Safe. The film is directed by Cesare Cannavaro, who also wrote the film alongside Alberto Pena. Music is by Gian Piero Reverberi. It stars Dmitry Nabokov as Steve, Maria Luisa Geisberger as Anna, Ben Salvador as Juan, Stano Gadwin as Klaus, Alex Morrison as Albert, Karina Carr as Karina, and Cristina Giaioni as Janine. The plot follows 4 international jewel thieves as they shack up in an Italian castle belonging to their former employer with the intent to divide the hidden loot of stolen diamonds. The diamonds are secured safely in a locked safe, and each of them has their own key to open it. Problems arise when Albert claims to have lost his key, to which the others suspect that he is planning something so he can make off with the cachet of diamonds. The others steal Albert's narcotics so he will confess whatever he may be planning, but he dies. They suspect he ended things due to withdrawals, but soon enough it becomes apparent that someone has killed him, one of the members of the group, and that this person is the one trying to make off with the diamonds. The film is a Giallo crime hybrid and predates later entries into the genre, which would also be based on a group of devious people meeting in an isolated locale so that they may attempt to off one another in order to be the sole inheritor of some prize, usually a large sum of money. In a few years, Mario Bava would showcase $5 for an August Moon, a personal favorite of mine, and later that same year, Twitch of the Death Nerve, aka A Bay of Blood. The film hardly offers anything new or original, but it is considerably better executed than many of the pseudo-gothic thrillers of this same period, and it is a shame that the movie lacks such notoriety, even among the Giallo community. The biggest reason why the film remains obscure is likely due to the lack of anybody being tied to its production who has any name value. In other words, didn't land more success in the genre. I think there are plenty of Giallo films by directors who only made a single Giallo film, so this reason doesn't totally check out for me, but regardless, the film lacks a restoration on home video. The film is not entirely a masterpiece, however, yet it is very lively and fraught with style. To the film's detriment, it attempts to pile on twist upon twist in the climax to the point that it seems unbelievable that these masterminds would have fallen into so many traps which led to their individual downfalls. Plus, despite being very creative, the kills themselves are fairly bland and forgettable. Despite its shortcomings, this film is stylish, thorough, and executed very well. No, the title doesn't make a lick of sense, but the cinematography is top-notch, and visually there is a lot to feast upon. The soundtrack is very appropriate in setting the right tone for the material, and the cast plays all their parts very adeptly. The director, Cesare Cannavaro, was born in 1927 in Milan and directed his first film, Die for $1 in Tucson, in 1964. A spaghetti western. His other films include Matalo, 1970, another yet very absurd spaghetti western, The Nude Princess, 1976, a sexploitation, plus The Gestapo's Orgy, 1977. His final film was Killing of the Flesh, 1983, a very trashy Giallo. Cannavaro passed away in 2012. The final film for this video, and 5th of 8 Giallo films that came out in 1968, is Naked You Die, an Italian and US Giallo. The film is directed by Antonio Margheriti, billed as Anthony Dawson, who also wrote it along with Franco Bottari, Tudor Gates, who's uncredited, and Mario Bava, who is also uncredited. The music is by Carlos Savina. The cast includes Sally Smith as Jill, Eleonora Brown as Lucille, Mark Damon as Richard Barrett, Michael Rennie as Inspector Durand, Patrizia Valturi as Denise, and Luciano Pigozzi as La Florette. The plot is about a series of murders which plague an upscale private all-girls school. The inspector has a rough go of things considering the high supply of potential suspects, and his efforts don't slow the killings. Jill, one of the students, eventually tries her hand at playing amateur detective, but this only paints a target on her back. The inception of the film, according to Tim Lucas, began when American producer Lawrence Woolner relocated to Rome and approached Mario Bava with a deal for him to direct a new thriller film. The two had worked previously together in a limited capacity. Lawrence represented one half of the Woolner Brothers distribution company and had done the US distribution for Bava's Blood and Blacklace, 1964, which had great success in the States. The story Woolner presented to Bava was written by British writers Tudor Gates and Brian Degas, similarly following the murder of girls at a school. Bava liked the idea and worked closer with Tudor Gates to develop the story further. But eventually, Bava had a falling out with the Woolners, and he opted to drop out of the project. Directing then went to Antonio Margheriti, who was oftentimes said to be Mario Bava's rival at the time in regards to Italian horror and fantasy. Despite people believing the two directors were heated rivals, Margheriti's son, Edoardo, has stated that the two men were actually colleagues who respected each other and were somewhat of close friends. Naked You Die, despite its dark themes, is closer in tone to the comic proto-giallo by Bava, The Girl Who Knew Too Much, 1963, versus the more sinister and fetishistic slasher-like giallo from Bava, Blood and Blacklace. The script does contain a healthy dosage of comedic moments, thanks to Bava's efforts, but these are touched on without dragging the film down, thanks to Margheriti's direction. Speaking of his direction, he does a good job technically speaking. He is competent, of course, but he seems rather uninspired in this foray. Perhaps he didn't fully grasp the comedic side of the script, or he refused to lean into it. The plot is presented as very absurd, but Margheriti approaches it very seriously and, dare to be said, reverent, although this never bridges the gap to being deadpan, which is itself a form of comedic expression. If anything, the final product comes across as a director who didn't fully understand the script as it was intended to be executed. To make matters worse, the cast is unimpressive and drags the film down a degree. Mark Damon's character is a writing instructor at the school who is simply a one-dimensional pervert who embodies the notion of the male gaze, and his performance hardly makes him likable. To the contrary, you end up despising him and waiting for his death. Perhaps this character would be more at home in a 1980s slasher, where despicable characters are almost required. Mark Damon was born in 1933 in Chicago. He portrayed Philip in Roger Corman's House of Usher, 1960. His first Italian film was Peccate d'estate, 1962, which was distributed in the US thanks to AIP to help give name value for Mario Bava's Three Faces of Fear anthology film, 1963. Damon would continue to work in Italian horror and spaghetti westerns through the 60s and 70s before transitioning to producer and distributor. The other actor imported to the picture by Woolner was Michael Rennie, a British thespian. Rennie, born in 1909, had an extensive film career through the mid-1930s, but struck lasting fame for his role as the alien visitor Klaatu in The Day the Earth Stood Still, 1951. He was active in film until the 1960s, but before the 70s, he became relegated to guest starring in European pictures, including Assignment Terror, 1970, co-starring with Paul Naschy. This was his final picture as he died in 1971 of emphysema. Rennie is hardly utilized well in the film as he arrives very late into the telling. Sally Smith, also British, plays Jill, the lead who takes on the investigation herself, and her character is practically a cheap copy of Laetitia Roman's character from The Girl Who Knew Too Much, with her propensity for murder mystery novels. But whereas Roman is spry and engaging, Smith is rather annoying and behaves like a busybody. With all this working against it, it is a wonder why this movie received a home video DVD release over Hyena. Antonio Margheriti was born in 1930 and entered into films in the late 1950s. Growing up, he was an avid fan of sci-fi and pulp fiction. He, similarly to Bava, worked on special effects and would contribute these efforts into his films and to others, such as Duck-You-Sucker, 1978 by Sergio Leone, Flesh for Frankenstein, 1973 by Paul Morrissey, and Inglourious Bastards, 1978 by Enzo G. Castellari. He struck early success with Barbara Steele with the Gothic film Castle of Blood, 1964, which he had inherited from Sergio Corbucci, who left the project. Like so many other Italian directors, he would assume a pseudonym which was heavily Anglicanized. Margheriti would go on to do films such as The War of the Planets, 1966, and Snow Devils, 1967, plus several horror films, war movies, sci-fis, and another giallo, Seven Deaths in the Cat's Eyes, 1973. He died in 2002 of a heart attack. Naked You Die is available on Region 1 DVD from Dark Sky. I hope you learned something new here. If you are interested in watching these movies, look them up online. If you do watch them or have already seen them, I invite you to leave your thoughts on them in the comments, especially for Hyena. Follow The King in Giallo on Instagram and give a like to The King in Giallo on Facebook. Subscribe here on YouTube if you aren't already, and join me every week for new Giallo film content. Upcoming content on The King in Giallo will be the overview, review, and Gialli tally for Umberto Lenzi's 1968 Proto-Giallo Orgasmo. Thank you all very much for your continued support here. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time.